The first thing I noticed that morning was the eerie silence where my mailbox used to be. No clatter of mail dropping, no familiar rustling of envelopes or packages, just emptiness. I stepped outside, eyes narrowing, and froze. My mailbox, the very symbol of connection to the outside world, had been ripped out of the ground. Just gone. No warning. No notice. Nothing. The edge of the freshly disturbed earth still looked raw, the wooden post splintered and discarded. Like trash on the curb, I felt a knot tighten in my chest. This mailbox was more than just a place for letters. It was a lifeline, a piece of my past, a reminder of my family, and a crucial link to the business I had painstakingly built. Now it had been erased by my own homeowners association, the HOA, without even the decency of a single phone call or a letter in return. My shock quickly twisted into outrage. Who had the authority to just obliterate my property, my personal sanctuary, with such reckless arrogance? The HOA had no right, but they acted like they were above the rules, like the law did not apply to them. Their audacity was staggering. This was no mere enforcement of community guidelines. It was a deliberate, spiteful strike meant to send a message. As I stared at the empty patch in my front yard, a familiar calm washed over me. Most people would have been paralyzed by shock or anger, but I was not most people. Years in the military taught me to remain steady in the eye of the storm. My engineering background trained me to find solutions, not excuses. And my quiet years running a tech startup sharpened my mind for creative strategies against impossible odds. This wasn't going to end with me begging or backing down. No, this was just the beginning. I pulled out my phone and started drafting a plan, one they would never expect. If they wanted to control the ground, I would take the battle to the skies. I wasn't just going to replace my mailbox. I was going to build something far more powerful, a drone landing pad. And I knew exactly where to install it, right on the HOA, president's own roof. Their control over me was about to be flipped upside down. What happened next would blow my mind, and prove once and for all that even the most powerful bullies can be beaten when you fight smart, not just hard. Now I want to hear from you. Comment below where you're watching from, because this kind of HOA nightmare happens everywhere. These stories of petty power plays, overreaching authorities, and personal invasions are far too common. But the truth is, justice can prevail. And my story? It is living proof. Stay tuned, because the fight is just beginning. My name is Sarah Miller. I am 38 years old, and I have always been the kind of person who values order and precision. Before settling here, I spent 10 years as an aerospace engineer in the military, designing and testing advanced drone systems. The discipline and patience required in that line of work shaped me into someone meticulous and methodical, traits I carried with me into civilian life. After leaving the service, I transitioned into cybersecurity consulting, where attention to detail and resilience became my daily armor. Living here in this quiet suburban neighborhood, I found the peace I craved after years of chaos. The streets are lined with maple trees, their leaves whispering softly in the early morning breeze. Birdsong fills the air like a gentle symphony, and the faint aroma of fresh coffee drifts from my porch, where I spend most mornings sipping from a chipped ceramic mug, watching the world wake up. My home is modest but well kept, a sanctuary where every corner tells a story. The flower beds bloom with lavender and daisies, and the soft hum of the sprinkler system soothes my nerves after a long day. This is a place where I could finally breathe easy, a contrast to the rigid, high-stress world I left behind. But at the heart of my little haven stood something even more personal than the house itself, my mailbox. It was not just a metal box on a wooden post. It was a gift from my late father, who passed away 5 years ago. He had built it himself, carving our family name into the wood with care, then painting it in deep forest green. A color, he said, symbolized growth and stability. It held letters from old friends, postcards from distant relatives, and countless documents related to the small consulting business I run from home. The mailbox was a tangible connection to my roots, a vessel carrying memories, news, and trust. Each time I retrieved mail from that box, it felt like a ritual, a moment of connection to the world beyond these neatly trimmed hedges. More than that, it was a symbol of my independence and sovereignty as a homeowner. To have it taken away without explanation was more than an inconvenience. It was a violation of my identity and privacy. The neighborhood itself was peaceful, but I had noticed small creeping tensions from the start. At first, they were just minor things, notes from the HOA reminding me to remove my wind chimes because they did not conform to community aesthetics, or a polite, yet pointed, message about the angle of my garden gnome's hat. There was also a terse notice about parking, demanding that my friend move his car out of the driveway during certain hours, even though it was on my property. These seemed trivial at first, almost laughable, but I sensed an undercurrent of control that felt uncomfortable. Those subtle early interactions hinted at a growing resistance to anything outside the HOA's rigid idea of conformity. I realized quickly that this neighborhood was not just about maintaining appearances, it was about exerting power. Inside, I wrestled with the symbolic weight of the mailbox's removal. It was more than wood and metal. It was a daily assertion of my right to communicate freely, to connect with family and friends, and to run my life on my own terms. Losing it felt like losing a piece of my autonomy, a breach of trust by an institution I had believed existed to protect our shared interests. As I stood there, looking at the bare patch of earth where the mailbox once stood, I made a silent vow. This was not just about a box. It was about standing firm for my principles, my history, and my future. I would not let this neighborhood become a place where fear and petty tyranny replaced community and respect. With every fiber of my being, I was ready to reclaim not just my mailbox, but my dignity, and to fight back smarter than anyone expected. The face of the HOA's wrath was none other than Gregory Langford, a man in his early 50s with the polished look of a corporate executive who fancied himself a kingpin of suburban order. Gregory always wore tailored suits, even to board. Meetings held in a cramped community center, and his perfectly slicked back hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights like a polished helmet. His sharp blue eyes held the calculating glint of a man who thrived on control, while his thin lips often curled into a smug smile that suggested he believed he was doing the world a favor by enforcing their rules. His mannerisms were as precise as his wardrobe. Every word came clipped and rehearsed, his tone dripping with condescension, as if speaking to children who simply had to be reminded of their place. When he walked into a room, shoulders back and chest out, it was clear Gregory enjoyed the performance of power almost as much as the power itself. But beneath that polished exterior was a toxic brew of vindictiveness, egomania, and a deep-seated need to dominate. Gregory's spoiled upbringing was evident in the way he dismissed dissent, wielding petty HOA regulations like weapons rather than community guidelines. His manipulative nature meant he was always watching, always scheming, ready to use any means necessary to maintain his grip on the neighborhood. The conflict began innocuously enough. A letter slipped under my door, stamped with the HOA seal and Gregory's signature. It read, in painfully formal language, that my mailbox did not meet community standards and was considered an obstruction to the neighborhood aesthetic. The letter demanded that I remove or replace it within 15 days or face escalating fines. I stared at the notice in disbelief. My mailbox, handcrafted by my late father, carefully maintained, and proudly standing on my property, was suddenly the villain in some twisted drama. The community standards it supposedly violated were vague at best, and no prior warnings had ever been issued, not one to be intimidated. I requested a meeting with Gregory to discuss the matter calmly and reasonably. When we met, his smug smile was already in place, and he greeted me with an icy, clipped, "Good afternoon, Sarah." "I'm here to discuss your mailbox," he said, as if it were the greatest offense to humanity. "I want to understand the specific issues so we can find a solution," I replied evenly, laying out the facts calmly. "The mailbox was a gift from my father. It's on my property, and it doesn't impede any traffic or safety concerns." Gregory tapped a perfectly manicured nail against his briefcase. "The issue isn't safety, Ms. Miller. It's about appearance. We maintain high standards here, and your mailbox, frankly, disrupts the uniformity and charm of the community." I raised an eyebrow. "Uniformity? There are half a dozen different mailbox styles on this street alone." He waved a hand dismissively. "Those are grandfathered in. New or renovated mailboxes must conform. Yours was never approved." His tone hardened. "You were given ample notice through our community newsletters." "I never received any such notice," I said firmly. "And even so, this is a deeply personal item, not a decoration." Gregory's smile vanished for a moment, replaced by a flash of annoyance. "Personal or not, the rules are the rules." "I'm willing to discuss alternatives," I offered. "Perhaps a paint touch-up or repositioning to meet guidelines." His eyes narrowed. "I'm afraid that's not acceptable. The HOA board has already voted on this matter." "And what if I refuse to comply?" I asked, steadying myself. His voice dropped to a threatening whisper. "Then you will be subject to fines, legal action, and possible lien on your property." There was no room for negotiation. This was not a community protecting standards. This was an iron fist cloaked in petty rules. Unbeknownst to me, as the conversation progressed, Gregory casually slipped a small device into his breast pocket. A hidden recorder, no doubt, and subtly nodded toward a small camera concealed among the potted plants nearby. He thrived on gathering ammunition for his power plays. Behind that polished smile was a man not content with enforcing trivial rules. His real goal was to push me out. Word on the street was that Gregory had ambitions, big ones involving lucrative redevelopment deals that required clearing certain obstacles. My presence, my refusal to conform, stood directly in his way. The mailbox was only the first skirmish in a war one had yet to fully comprehend. Gregory's smile hid a deeper darkness, and I was about to become the target of a campaign far more ruthless than any notice or fine. But I was ready, and I was watching him just as closely as he was watching me. What started as a simple dispute over a mailbox quickly spiraled into a campaign of relentless harassment. It was as if Gregory Langford and his HOA had declared war, not just on my mailbox, but on me. Within days of our confrontation, I found my mailbox spray-painted in bright, garish colors, mocking words and crude symbols, smeared across the once pristine wood. The post was cracked, likely hit with a blunt object, the damage intentional and vicious. Each morning, I discovered new acts of vandalism, as if someone took pleasure in tearing down something so personal. When I reported the damage, the HOA's response was cold and indifferent. Instead of reprimanding anyone or offering restitution, they sent me notices warning that I was responsible for maintaining community property and threatening fines if the mailbox was not repaired to approved specifications. I was bewildered and furious, but I knew fighting back required calm and strategy. The fines began to pile up, first a few $100s, then thousands. Letters from the HOA's legal counsel arrived weekly, filled with vague accusations and thinly veiled threats. The tone was clear: comply or suffer the consequences. As if this harassment wasn't enough, I started receiving notices from the local post office. The HOA had lodged formal complaints claiming my mailbox was non-compliant and posing a hazard to mail delivery personnel. City officials also contacted me, insisting on inspections and citing obscure codes I had never heard of. I knew these complaints were baseless. Nothing had changed about my mailbox's position or structure. It was all part of a coordinated effort to wear me down. Meanwhile, rumors began to spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Some neighbors whispered that I was difficult, combative, even a menace to the community. Gossip painted me as the antagonist, not the victim. I could feel the isolation creeping in as friends avoided me, afraid of becoming targets themselves. To make matters worse, my trusted landscapers suddenly refused to work on my property, citing insurance concerns raised by the HOA. Package deliveries became erratic. Drivers would leave boxes at the curb or return items marked undeliverable because they claimed they couldn't access my driveway. One evening, while walking my dog, I noticed unfamiliar cameras mounted discreetly on lampposts and even hidden in the bushes near my home. It was clear the HOA was conducting surveillance, hoping to catch me in some sort of violation or weakness. Paranoia gnawed at me, but I refused to give them the satisfaction. The emotional toll was crushing. Sleepless nights stretched into weeks. Anxiety settled into the pit of my stomach, manifesting in headaches and restless pacing. I felt trapped in my own home, a prisoner to invisible forces determined to break me. Financial strain piled on as well. Repairs to the mailbox, replacing the vandalized parts, hiring security consultants, and consulting attorneys, all expenses I had not anticipated. Bills stacked on the kitchen table like a silent reminder of the battle I was fighting. Through it all, Gregory's arrogance grew. He held court at community meetings with an air of untouchable superiority, his smug smile unshaken. He seemed convinced his power was absolute, that no one could challenge him, and lived to tell the tale. But beneath his confident facade, I sensed a darker, more calculated motive. Whispers among the community hinted at Gregory's grand plan. A large-scale development project, one that promised significant financial gain for him and a handful of board members. To make this possible, certain properties, mine included, had to be cleared. The mailbox dispute was just the opening salvo in a campaign to force me out, to seize my land for their profit. Their game was ruthless and deeply personal. Yet, as the pressure mounted and the walls closed in, I found strength in the knowledge that this wasn't just my fight anymore. It was a battle for my dignity, my home, and the truth. And I was determined to expose the corruption hiding behind the HOA's pristine image, no matter the cost. By the time I realized the fight was far bigger than just a mailbox, I had already been pushed to the edge. Yet it was in those moments of despair that I found a wellspring of resolve. I refused to be crushed under the weight of Gregory's tyranny. Instead, I decided to turn the tables with the one weapon that could never be silenced: evidence. I began my investigation quietly, digging into every HOA document, board meeting transcript, and community newsletter I could find. Hours turned into nights spent scrolling through poorly organized digital files and faded paper records. What I uncovered was staggering. Forged signatures on official HOA documents, financial statements that didn't add up, and suspicious transfers, pointing to embezzled funds, all tied directly to Gregory and a handful of his closest. All eyes on the board, but the corruption ran deeper than money. I uncovered records of unauthorized surveillance cameras installed not only around my property, but across the neighborhood. Hidden microphones, drone flights spying from above, and even intercepted community emails. They had weaponized our privacy, turning neighbors into unwitting spies for their personal vendetta. Realizing I couldn't do this alone, I reached out cautiously, starting with my immediate neighbor, Jake. Jake was a quiet man in his late 40s. A software developer with a reputation for being tech-savvy but reserved. When I showed him the security footage I had managed to capture on my own clear images of board members, removing parts of my mailbox and coordinating under the cover of night, he agreed to help. Jake installed discrete cameras around my property, feeding live streams directly to me and backing up all footage securely. His knowledge was invaluable. Next came Linda, a retired CPA who had lived here for nearly 2 decades. She had grown suspicious of the HOA's financial reports, but lacked proof. When I invited her to review the documents I had obtained, her eyes widened. "This isn't just sloppy accounting," she said gravely. "It's outright fraud. Look. Here are expenses that never occurred, phantom contractors, money disappearing into private accounts." Together, we began tracing the money trail that led directly back to Gregory. The biggest breakthrough came when a disgruntled board member, Paul, contacted me anonymously. Paul had been part of the HOA leadership, but had grown disillusioned by Gregory's growing abuse of power. His decision to come forward was risky, but he provided insider documents, emails, meeting minutes, and voice recordings that exposed backroom deals and explicit plans to push residents like me out for development projects. Paul became a crucial ally, offering details no outsider could know. My military training helped me reach out to contacts from my past legal experts, former colleagues, and even a trusted investigator. They lent credibility and guidance, helping me understand how best to compile and present my findings. Their support was a lifeline, reminding me I was not alone in this. As word spread, other neighbors began sharing their own stories of intimidation, unexplained fines, and invasions of privacy. Many had suffered quietly for years, too fearful to speak. United by our shared experience, we formed a coalition, pooling resources and testimonies to build an airtight case. Every piece of evidence became a weapon. I meticulously archived emails, audio recordings, video footage, financial records, and sworn affidavits. Each file was cataloged and backed up, creating a digital fortress no amount of denial could dismantle. The documentation was overwhelming, a mountain of proof that exposed the HOA's dark underbelly for all to see. With our coalition growing stronger and the evidence undeniable, we prepared for the decisive confrontation. This was no longer just about my mailbox or even my home. It was about justice, accountability, and reclaiming our community from corruption. I knew the road ahead would be grueling, but armed with truth and allies, I was ready to face whatever Gregory and his cronies would throw at us. The fight was far from over, but for the first time, victory felt within reach. The day of the HOA board meeting arrived with an almost palpable tension hanging over the community center's cramped meeting hall. Word had spread quickly this was no ordinary gathering. Residents crammed into every seat, whispers buzzing through the air like static electricity. Cameras from local news outlets were positioned discreetly in the back, ready to capture the spectacle. Gregory Langford entered first, immaculate as ever in his tailored suit, the smug smile firmly in place. His confident stride and practiced charm were meant to project control, but beneath that polished exterior, I could see a flicker of unease. This would be the moment his carefully constructed world came crashing down. As the meeting opened, Gregory seized the floor immediately. His voice was sharp, smooth, and rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for attending. Today, I will expose the baseless allegations leveled against me and this board." He turned to me, eyes narrowing. "Ms. Miller has fabricated lies and manipulated neighbors to undermine the very fabric of our community." He painted me as a disruptive element, a troublemaker with a personal vendetta. He smeared my character with innuendo and half-truths, claiming my actions had endangered community harmony and property values. The crowd murmured, some uncertain, others clearly swayed by his performance. But the moment I had prepared for came swiftly. I stood, heart pounding but voice steady. "I'm here not just for myself, but for everyone who has suffered under this corrupt regime." Turning to Jake, I nodded, and the room's large projector flickered to life. First came the video footage, clear, time-stamped recordings of board members tampering with my mailbox, coordinating surveillance, and discussing plans to remove residents like me. Gasps rippled through the audience. The visual proof was undeniable. Next, Linda took the floor, presenting meticulously detailed financial ledgers. Charts displayed funds siphoned from HOA accounts into private bank statements linked to Gregory and his associates. Every number was verified, every transaction tracked. Then Paul shared voice recordings from secret meetings, harsh words exposing intentions to intimidate, smear, and forcibly evict homeowners standing in the way of lucrative development deals. With each revelation, Gregory's facade cracked. His polished veneer faltered as whispers turned to shocked murmurs, and then to outright outrage. His confident posture stiffened, and his eyes darted nervously around the room. When confronted with the mounting evidence, Gregory's composure shattered entirely. In a moment of unrestrained anger, he lashed out, shouting accusations at me. And the allies, his voice cracked, revealing desperation. "You don't understand what you're meddling with. This community belongs to those who make it strong. You think you can destroy that? You will regret this." But then, almost involuntarily, his voice dropped. Under pressure, he began to reveal more than intended, the extent of his illegal schemes. The collusion with city officials, the threats to anyone who opposed him. It was an unhinged confession in front of neighbors, cameras, and now law enforcement officers who had arrived quietly, responding to a tip about possible criminal activity. Officers moved swiftly, handcuffing Gregory and several other board members, on charges ranging from fraud to harassment and conspiracy. The stunned audience erupted in a mix of shock and cheers. As the heavy doors closed behind the detained HOA leaders, a wave of relief and triumph washed over the community. For the first time in years, justice had been served. I stood among my allies, overwhelmed by the moment's gravity. The fight had been long and painful, but now it was clear. Truth, courage, and unity had shattered the illusion of power and exposed the darkness beneath. The crowd's applause was not just for me, but for every neighbor who dared to stand up, every voice that refused to be silenced. It was the catharsis of a community reclaimed, a victory not just over corrupt leaders, but over fear itself. The fallout from the climactic confrontation was swift and unforgiving. Gregory Langford and his closest allies faced immediate public humiliation as news of their arrest and the extent of their corruption spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. And local media headlines screamed about embezzlement, illegal surveillance, and harassment campaigns. And the once proud HOA president became a figure of disgrace and infamy. Criminal charges piled up: fraud, conspiracy, abuse of power, and the court demanded hefty restitution payments to repair the financial damage caused to the community and individual homeowners. For many, it was a bittersweet moment. Justice had been served, but the scars ran deep. In the wake of this collapse, the HOA itself was dissolved. The community came together to establish a new, transparent, and democratic board, one built on principles of fairness and respect rather than control and fear. Every resident was given a voice, and decisions were made openly, with clear channels of communication and accountability. One of the first acts of the new board was to reverse all the unfair fines and rescind the oppressive rules that had strangled personal freedoms for so long. Lawn decorations, mailbox styles, even parking regulations were relaxed, restoring a sense of autonomy and trust. Residents who had felt silenced for years finally spoke up, sharing ideas and hopes for a better community. The healing process was gradual but powerful. Neighborhood socials became regular events: block parties, potlucks, and garden days where people worked side by side planting flowers, sharing stories, and rebuilding connections. A collaborative community garden sprouted where vacant lots once stood neglected, and secure, moderated online forums were established to keep communication open and respectful. As for me, life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy. The anxiety and sleepless nights faded, replaced by a quiet satisfaction and renewed purpose. Neighbors who had once eyed me with suspicion now greeted me warmly, often with words of thanks or admiration. Though I never sought the spotlight, I became an unofficial local hero, a symbol of resilience and courage that my mailbox was restored, rebuilt with care to honor my father's memory. It now stands proudly next to a small drone landing pad I installed on my property, a reminder of the battle fought and the vigilance required to protect our freedoms. The drone pad is more than a technological novelty. It is a symbol of standing guard against tyranny and a beacon of empowerment. This chapter of our neighborhood's history serves as a lasting lesson: resilience in the face of oppression, unity against corruption, and the power each individual holds when they refuse to bow to injustice. It is proof that even in the darkest times, standing together and documenting the truth can bring light, and that tyranny, no matter how deeply rooted, can be uprooted. Our story is not just about a mailbox or a drone pad. It is about reclaiming dignity, community, and hope. And it is a reminder to all who hear it: when we stand firm and stand united, justice will prevail. Looking back on everything, I am struck by how much this journey changed me. What began as a fight over something as simple as a mailbox became a battle for my very sense of self, my dignity, and my community. I learned that strength does not always roar loudly. It often grows quietly in the face of adversity, fueled by patience, resilience, and the unwavering belief that justice matters. I have found peace in knowing that I stood my ground, not just for myself, but for everyone who felt powerless against those who wield control with cruelty and greed. The scars of this ordeal remain, but they serve as reminders of what is possible when we refuse to be silenced. Still, vigilance is necessary. Tyranny rarely disappears overnight, and it is up to all of us to guard our communities against those who seek to impose fear and domination. But now we are empowered not by fear, but by unity and truth. Our neighborhood is stronger, more open, and more just because we dared to stand up together. As for Gregory Langford, his fate was sealed the day the truth came to light. He now faces years behind bars, stripped of his wealth, his status, and any power he once wielded. The legacy he leaves is a warning. Abuse of trust will always be met with consequences. To everyone watching, I urge you comment below with your own HOA horror stories or experiences with community conflict. Your voices matter. Sharing your story shines a light on injustice and inspires courage in others who may be struggling in silence. Who knows? Your story could be the next one I share, proving that even against the greatest odds, standing up and standing together can change everything. We are stronger when we unite, and together we can reclaim our communities, our peace, and our futures.